الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة. أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله هو الله والله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العظيم. الفاتحة والصلوات.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and thank you all for coming to our Muharram lecture series on 23 years of prophethood and transformation. This year's lecture series is sponsored on behalf of the marhumin displayed on the TV screen outside the chapel. Can we please recite a Surah Fatiha for these and all other marhumin? Just a quick health and safety note in case of an emergency. The fire exits are located just here at the back of the chapel, the main entrance outside the chapel, and the double doors by the dining room. Can I request you all not to park at the roundabout, please? And if you could, please move your car. The conference room is available for families with younger children. So for parents, if you do have very small children or who are making noise, then you can head to the conference room, which is down the corridor and on the left. Without further ado, I would like to invite Shaykh Arif to deliver tonight's lecture. Can I request you all to move forward before we do so, because I think we're getting busier as the nights go on, and if you recite a salawat, you do so.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. So the Prophet's arrival in Medina, and now he has to create a community, give it identity. And we can see how he is using the context, the Blessed Prophet's attitude, broad outlook, and the revelation coming together. So the revelation immediately builds on the existing context of the Abrahamic faiths. The only thing the Prophet says there is that we are one people, and essentially there is no distinction between us and between you. Now it appears that the Blessed Prophet was leaving two levels of Islam behind, and he created these two levels of Islam. One was the broader notion of Islam, and if you make reference to the Quran, it consistently maintains that the deen with Allah is Islam. The same deen formulated for Nuh, for Abraham, Moses, Isa are all quoted in the Quran as saying we are Muslims, to the extent the children of Jacob and the Hawariyun, the disciples of Isa. So we are all one people. It seems that the Blessed Prophet came to revive the faith of Abraham in essence. That was the first thing he was doing. The other thing he had to do was to give the emerging community its own place, its own identity, because they would not fit in with the Jews and the Christians. And of course, radically, the Jews were saying that the Messiah hadn't come. Leave aside Ahmad, the Prophet Muhammad. And the Christians were saying that the Messiah had come and was a son of God. So theologically, they did not fit in well. There was a need for the creation of a new community and for an appropriate law system to govern them and allow them to evolve and to grow. And this is the phenomenal part of Islam that the Prophet is able to impart within 23 years. But the first thing he does is, he says, at the level of monotheism, we are one. The other is the polytheist. Now, the polytheist wasn't other for the sake of being polytheist per se. The polytheist was other for the sake of their opposition to moral teachings and virtues, and then to promote a wayward theology and practice in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you see the Meccan verses, they are asking the Quraysh, can Allah ordain this? So it seems that the Quraysh were actually propagating a value system, a theology in the name of Allah that was totally inconsistent with the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had preached His message from the time of Abraham and now was reviving it. So there was a real problem with the Qurayshi, Kuffar and Mushrikeen. Now I've made this point in book 3 of Islam and God Centricity, that the Hindus are not mushrik. If you study those verses carefully, this is just on the side as a side note, Hindus are not mushrik. Why? If you were to ask the Meccans, who is your God and what does God ordain? They might say to you that there are intermediaries to God, but then there is God above all. Ask them, for whom are the heavens and the earth? And they will say, Lillah, for Allah. They would say it. They would say for Allah. Yet you ask them, what does this Allah ordain you to do? And they would say, well, eating corpse, for example, eating blood, that's fine. Marrying our inherited mothers, exploitation, indecency. So God is saying to them, can Allah ever ordain indecency? Can Allah ever ordain injustices? Can Allah ever ordain maltreatment of the orphans and neglect of the poor? If you ask the Hindu, who is God? They will say, we all have one God. You ask them, does God allow you to cheat anybody? They will say, of course not. Does God ordain you to understand life as sacred? They would say, of course, yes. Does God ordain you to love your neighbors? Yes. To feed the poor? Yes. All the moral, spiritual values that we associate with communication of God, Hindus associate the same values with God. Now they have faltered somewhere in terms of their intermediaries, but at least they're talking about one God and the same communication that we believe in essence. That actually leads me to believe that their origins are Abrahamic in one way or another, and we need to obviously deal with this at a future date. But look at the way the Prophet has empowered his community. His community now, after he went and during his time, were cordially living with the interfaith community. The Quran, in fact, goes as far as to say that we believe in everything revealed unto us as we believe in everything revealed unto you. Now, this is a huge statement, but the Muslims have failed to understand it. You see, there are lots of things in the Quran that we don't understand. Why? Because the context is not there. The context is found in previous scriptures. By giving our commitment that we believe in everything revealed unto you and it's from the same author, وَإِلَهُنَا وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ, our God and your God is one God. We are actually making a commitment that we will study the Word of God as contained by you in your scripture. Now, had we bothered to study the Word of God as contained within the Torah and the Injil and the Suhuf, the ancient text, we would have a far more accurate understanding of what the Quran is doing and what the Quran is saying. And it stands to reason that an author needlessly does not repeat himself. If you write something in your first book, you will not repeat it in the second one. What you write in the second one, you will not repeat it in the third one. You will expect the reader to have read the previous works and then understand the fullness of the message. Now here you find a verse within Surah Baqarah. Now this verse is saying, and Surah Baqarah, the major part of it is addressing the Jews. The major part of the first Jews and a lot of, and parts of the second Jews. It's addressing the Jews because it's the immediate context, and that's the beauty of the Quran. It's context specific and mindful in the way it speaks. So you ask, the verse comes, or do they wait for God to descend upon them in clouds of smoke? And the matter is decided decisively. Now here you will find the Mufassirin of Islam saying that of course this is a metaphorical verse. God can't descend in clouds of smoke. Now, if we were to read the previous scriptures, we will find reference to this particular notion of clouds of smoke descending and what they associated with their authority descending with it. So here the Quran is very context specific, addressing the verse through the Prophet to the Jews in a context that they understood. Now, had the Muslims, us, bothered to read the previous scriptures, we would have known that this is not a metaphor. It is in reference to something that had already happened, and it was there to convince them. So the way the Quran was speaking to them, it actually made sense to the Jews, the Jewish community, that, this man knows. He knows what he's saying, and he hasn't read our scriptures. But the overall effect is that the Muslims are marrying the people of the book, and we will discuss that right towards the end as well, marrying the people of the book, saying to them that we and you are one. And the Jewish community is seeing how the laws within Judaism are being upheld by the Prophet and his community, how the Salah, with a little bit of modification, is maintained. The Christians are seeing how the Siyam, with a bit of modification, is maintained. These people were so broad-minded, the community of the Muslims. They did not have the disease of exclusivism in their minds. It was a new emerging community. They were filled with confidence. They were clean slates. They were not plagued by a former religion other than paganism, which was nothing but darkness and filth. They were purged totally. On the other hand, you find the Jews and the Christians. Their state at that point resembles our state, the Muslim state today. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودِ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودِ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ. The Jews say the Christians are upon no firm ground or know not the truth. And the Christians say that the Jews do not know anything of the truth. The Quran says, and yet they both read the book. The book is from the same author. They are reading the same scriptures. And yet they are pointing fingers at each other and saying that you are wrong and you are wrong. This is a disease that we have today, with the Muslims saying to the Christians and the Jews, you don't know anything. And the community, Abrahamic community, telling us you don't know anything. And of course, all of us, whether Jews, Christians, or Muslims, we have gone into sectarianism now. And each sect is saying to the other sect, you don't know what you're talking about, and you don't know what you're talking about. I am the only right one. This was a sickness that the Jews and the Christians had. The vision of the Blessed Prophet was much, much, much broader. Can you imagine? Despite their rejection of the Prophet, claiming that Isa is the Son of God, the Quran in two places very explicitly, and many other verses, says, indeed those who believe, meaning the people who follow the Prophet Muhammad, the Jews, the Christians, the Sabians, whoever amongst them entertains proper faith in his heart with Allah, believes in the hereafter, does righteous deeds, they will have their paradise and there will be no fear upon them. Imagine the broadness of the prophetic vision. This verse excludes the mention of any prophet. Imagine the broadness of the mind of the Prophet. And this verse bears testimony, and all the rest of the verses, that this grand man was the man of God, and one of the greatest man, if not the greatest person who has ever lived and walked upon the face of this earth, who is so sincere that he cares not for his own name to be included anywhere within the story of salvation. Salvation is not made contingent upon Muhammad Rasulullah. Salvation is made contingent upon monotheism, God centricity, upon righteous deeds and sense of responsibility. But in any case, when these verses were coming, the Jews and the Christians were actually observing the emerging Muslim community. They were understanding their level of confidence that they had in their God, in their religion, in their Prophet, and in themselves. Now, not all of them were like this, as you will see tomorrow. A lot of them are still very skeptical in Medina. And in fact, the toughest time that the Prophet has had was within Medina, I believe, from my reading. Together with this monotheistic religion, of the essence that the Prophet was creating, he was constantly admonishing them to think, to deliberate, because the verse did say, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. He was teaching them wisdom. Wisdom meant to observe nature, then to reflect upon it, and to find God through it, and to find higher purposes through it. This had become the spiritual disposition of the community of the Muslims at that point. That they were very observant. They were very God-centered. They remembered God at all points. And the prophetic, and then you see that what this resulted in the Muslim expansion. They were not at all insecure people. They went and they took the knowledge of the Greeks. They brought it over to Arabia, translated it into Arabic, augmented it, and developed their own sciences. For example, logic and philosophy. All of this are got from the Greeks. The Muslims had no problem, whereas previously the Christians had barred such knowledge, seeing it as heretical knowledge or something that is ungodly. The Muslims had full confidence. This was the result of the teachings of the Prophet and the broader Islam that he created. He was liberating them. Think about it. Within no time, Muslims are building observatories in the time of Bani Abbas, understanding astronomy. They are scientists. They are explorers. They are seeing their God through their exploration. It wasn't the way it is today, that science challenges God. At that point, there was no question of anything challenging God. God is the one that is beyond. هُوَ الْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ وَالظَّاهِرُ وَالْبَاطِنُ. He is the first, He is the last. He is the apparent, He is the hidden. He is not somebody who will come into challenge with science or any other religion. He is beyond it all. He does not introduce Himself as the God of Islam. He says, I am the God of Islam. As surrender, God centricity, which is the God of all faith and no faith put together. Wahidul Qahhar. He is the one and He breaks every limit. Whether you call yourself an atheist, theist, deist, whatever you want to call yourself, Wahidul Qahhar, He is the only one. So there was in their minds, there was no challenge between science and God. Well, the challenge in our minds is between science and Islam, because Islam needs to be challenged by science. Our notion of God is a God that is other than the God of Christians and the Jews. We have particularized God. As I said yesterday, we've made God into a human God now, whereas God is God. Rabbul Alameen. In any case, you can see how the community flourishes through the broader sense of Islam that the Blessed Prophet leaves behind. But at the same time, the Quran is so mindful to not to offend this religious community. He says, look, those Christians who say that God is one of three, these people are committing a form of knowing denial. And that is understood very mellowly and gently. Intahu khairan lakum. Desist from this, it's good for you. It's a very polite tone in which the Quran talks to the Christians, telling them to tweak their understanding. But at the same time, look at the humility that the Quran introduces within the minds of the Muslims. It says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Speak with them in the way that is most befitting. Then, the Quran does not say to the Muslims, but you have the right notion of God either. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like Him. Oh Muslim mind, you can't reach God either. So on the one hand, it's saying, engage with each other to dispel the false notion of God that is absurdly false. But at the same time, you, O Muslims, do not have an accurate understanding of God either. So don't be arrogant and stifled. All of you are on a learning curve. Learn together. That was the bigger Islam. The one that comes through the outlook and the attitude that the Blessed Prophet created. In terms of the particular Islam that the Prophet creates, and that was enviable. And I believe this is what we are suffering from today, that the elements of the particular Islam that the Prophet gives, by and large in Surah Baqarah, in fact I've been asked to quote the verses. So the one that I just quoted, قالت النصارى قالت اليهود ليست النصارى على شيء, is Surah Baqarah 113, yeah? Not to say that anybody will remember it after I finish talking. I just do as I'm been ordered, بَلِّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ. So the particular Islam that the Prophet was conveying, that particular Islam, we want to look at its tenets, its general features. But if you look at it carefully, they were imbibed with God's centricity and sense of spirituality. So when the Prophet was bringing in these laws, they were not seen as laws or practices. They were seen as meaningful actions connecting the individual essentially with God. So everything was geared towards God's centricity. So imagine these instructions of the Prophet that are beyond the laws. When you pick up your staff to walk in the morning, ask God to assist you. Imagine. When you take a morsel to eat, ask God to assist you to eat it. When you breathe, ask God to assist you between the two breaths. And in fact, Imam Zainul Abidin repeats this in his beautiful dua whenever he would hear the pronouncement of somebody's death. So the Prophet would tell them, involve God in every minute affair of your life. To the extent, just imagine, this is the verse. To the extent, O you who believe, when you are told to create space inside the mosque, create space inside the mosque, God will create space for you. What a mundane act. It's a mundane act, isn't it? Anybody who comes here in this hall, you will create space for them, wouldn't you? Of course you would. But the Prophet wanted to imbibe that mundane act with God's centricity. So here is the Prophet giving his law, but the law system that he gives has got certain character. That is what we want to look at, and maybe certain physical laws. Now you will see that the laws that the Quran was giving are minimalistic. They are more essential, less formalistic. So when the verse comes, and I'm just as a bit of a distraction from the discussion here, when the law came, wash your faces and wash your arms and wipe your heads and your feet, the Quran does not concern itself with the direction of washing the arms. It can't be bothered with it. It can't be bothered with washing the direction of the arm. Can you see that? It's minimalistic, it's essence-based. Wash your arms to prepare yourself for the reception of God. That's the whole idea there. Not the idea that you wash from top to bottom or bottom to top. Wash both of them together. If you have to, wash the left first, then the right, in order to break the great idol. On that note, remember when we used to do Hajj and there used to be the rotunda there, the plastic one? So one of my friends, he said, where should I do tawaf from? That looks so nice. I said, go up and do your tawaf. He said, yes, but where will I pray? I said, come back down and pray. He said, no, but I want to pray behind Maqam Ibrahim. I said, then pray behind Maqam Ibrahim. He said, but it's all plastic. Where will I do sajda? I said, on the plastic. He said, but shouldn't we do sajda on the turba? I said, it is important who you do sajda to, not what you do sajda on. He came back down. He said, I feel liberated. First time in my life I did sajda on plastic. I feel liberated. I've found a greater God. It is so true. It is so true. It is so true. Sometimes, whenever somebody is standing in front of me, I deliberately do wudu this way. And they dare not say anything to me because they know this mind is a crooked mind. But they look in astonishment. He does wudu that way. I said, well, this is nothing. I'm going to start praying this way as well, just for you. You see, the Quran is not concerned about these things. It's minimalistic. The Prophet did not understand the meaning of praying like this or praying like that. He was asked, which prayer is accepted? He replied, and later on Ali Salamullah alayhi, Imam Ali was asked and he replied in the same way. The Prophet said, the prayer that makes you into a better person has been accepted. Imam Ali was asked, which prayer is accepted? And people were going to ask, pray like this and Bismillah and Hamd and whatever they wanted to ask. Imam Ali just recited the verse of the Quran, Inna salah tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Salah repels you from indecencies and things that are below human character. If you find your salah is doing that for you, then that salah has been accepted. This was the overall character of the Islamic law, that it is God-centered. Center yourselves with God. Now the first thing is, the Quran gives a universal spiritual code. Pray, remember Allah. It did not concern itself with how you stand, how you sit, how you do wudu, how you pronounce the words. These are non-starters, they don't mean anything. You know, we hear of that wonderful event when the Sahaba came to the Prophet and they said that the adhan of Bilal is faulty. Instead of ashhadu, he's saying ashadu, like some of our Khoja members. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The Prophet said, the scene of Bilal is more beloved to God than the sheen of the Arabs. The Prophet himself has mentioned this. Yes? Pray to God. Remember God excessively. The law of purity. Purify yourself, zakat. The zakat was purification. I'm going to talk about zakat little while from now, in giving as well. But primarily zakat was to operate internally to remove greed, to remove insecurity. That was the law of spiritual law of purification. And cleanse yourselves properly as far as your hands and feet are concerned. Then of course, the Quran also taught laws of consumption of don't eat dead meat and blood and swine and so on and so forth. This was all within the spiritual law because the Prophet connected food substances and consumptions with its impact on the human spirit. So they come into spiritual law. Now, here the Quran keeps this particular massive principle as far as the universal spiritual code is concerned. Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu inna akramakum 'indallah atqakum. Now this is this is in Surah Hujurat, verse 13. It's a Medinan surah. You will find that ayyuhan nas comes in the Meccan surahs predominantly. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu and things like that come in the Medinan surahs. But this is a Medinan surah and a later one. But it is phrased in this way, Ya ayyuhan nas. Despite having his own community there, which has grown now, despite having the Abrahamic faiths, the verse begins with Ya ayyuhan nas, O human beings. We have created you from a male and a female, made you into tribes and nations, so that by mutual interaction, you may begin to know that the best of you in the sight of God is the one who is most God conscious. What audacity does the Quran and the Prophet have? After establishing your own faith, after establishing the broader faith, you are not going to prefer your own faith beyond the broader faith. At this point, he goes even beyond the Abrahamic faiths and says, O people, the best of you is the one who is most God conscious of you, whether it is Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or beyond these faiths. So that was the spiritual, universal code that the Quran gave. Then the other thing the Quran gives is the universal moral code, the sacredness and the value of life. The Arabs did not value life when the Prophet went. Vendettas, killing, it was just normal. I think Jafar Subhani mentions in one of his books that a young man was lamenting because his tribe was not one known for bloodshed. Had only I taken birth in a tribe that takes pleasure in unsheathing their swords and cutting limbs and seeing the dripping of blood. This was their mentality. The Prophet came and he said, no, life is sacred. And vendettas. If somebody kills somebody from your side, you have the right to kill one person on that side. And in fact, even then, to be lenient and forgive is better. Like in the law of retaliation, if somebody takes an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, the Quran builds on the Jewish law. However, it minimizes it as well. It's amazing how it's minimizing their laws. Sacredness of life is one of the principal moral codes. Freedom of thought. Of course, that freedom of thought. La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana rushdu min al-ghayy. Baqarah 256. Now imagine this verse. Where does the law of apostasy come from in Islam anyway? Is there any verse in the Quran that talks about apostasy? Yes. Does it talk about killing? No. It says, yes, the people who turn away from their faith, talks about them. Does it talk about killing them? No, because it's inconsistent with the spiritual Islam that the Prophet is bringing, in which human beings are encouraged to grow. There is no compulsion or coercion in religion. The truth has been made clear from falsehood. You need to choose it. God does not want robotic bodies to come to Islam. God wants open minds, thinking people, tending souls to come to Islam. Now here you can imagine how the Jews and the Christians must be reacting, that this religion is so broad, so confident, and we know it's the true religion. That it is giving its own people the right to think and to change. And it is giving other people the right to think and change their faith. Whereas previously those religions would not allow their people to change their faiths because of the fear of being ostracized. The Prophet had no notion of ostracizing people or killing people. Then you have the universal moral code of justice in societal regulations, in people's dealings with other people. Be just. So you can see all these rules, when people thought about them, they thought these are very rational. Intuitively it appealed to them. They felt that no, these laws make sense. They found them just. So you find these, and then another one is care for the kin, for the orphan, for the poor, for the neighbor, for the wayfarer. So Islam as a moral code introduced care for the other as a rule and a regulation within the minds of the Muslims, intertwined with godliness. Then you come to general features of the regulations that the Prophet gave in Islam. Now I do feel it is here that the Muslims have failed fully in their appreciation of what the law Prophet left. So the Quran says it is a Sharia of ease. Surah Baqarah 185, and I'm quoting them primarily from Baqarah because this is the first surah to be revealed. Yuridullah bikumul yusr wala yurid bikumul usr. Allah wants ease for you, He does not want difficulty for you. This verse the theme is repeated elsewhere as well. But this particular verse comes in the context of the fast of month of Ramadan. Fast. But those people who find it difficult, they can give fidyah. And those people who are sick or on travel may fast other days, because Allah wants ease for you, does not want difficulty for you. In another place Allah says, Allah has not made any difficulty for you in your deen. Allah does not want that. This 20-hour fast, it is not the want of God. It's a misinterpretation of the Muslims. 2, and then Allah says, La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah does not burden any soul beyond its ability. Little girls of 9 cannot bear 9 at 20-hour fast. People who are working in factories can't bear it. Students who are studying. So now you will say, well, no, they should fast after the month of Ramadan. Then I will say, then the whole of month of Ramadan becomes useless, doesn't it, effectively? So the law of God is not optimal, it's useless, and we can actually make a more optimal law than God Himself can make. Would you be ready and conceding to that particular argument? No. When majority of the people find it useless practice, then that means that God has not constructed a proper law. The fact is that we haven't understood it properly. The other feature of the law of the Prophet is that it's very, very pragmatic, and he says adaptability. When the Prophet came with the Meccans to Medina, he introduced the law of brotherhood. Why? Because the people of Mecca left their families in Mecca. They left their properties in Mecca that was confiscated by the Meccans. He then made brothers between the Muhajirin and the Ansar to the extent that they would share their wealth and property, and to the extent that they would inherit each other. It was a very pragmatic law. It was the need of the time. And that law was then abrogated or abolished, because it's sanctioned by the Quran, so it's abrogated. Later on, when the Meccans acquired a proper status within Medina and their families came over. It's a very pragmatic rule and a right. Then you can see this pragmatic nature of the Quran. 2 women witnesses to 1 male witness, and the Quran explains why. If one were to forget, the other one would remind her. Because women were not accustomed to retaining knowledge or information. So if one were to forget, then the other one will remind her. But if the one does not forget, there's no need to remind her. That's the essence. So when women acquire their ability to retaining knowledge, and of course nowadays the women don't forget anything, right? You can't see it, can you? Salawat. Those were the golden age of Islam. That was making wills. Make wills. The Quran is teaching them, because you will die. Those that you leave behind will need to be catered for. Shares of inheritance. Now, making will and shares of inheritance was in accordance with the societal setup. That the woman was the carer, the man was the provider. That's why you get the whole verse of qiwama, that man have qiwama over women, because that was the societal position of man. They had to till the land, they had to fight wars. But when the societal workings change, commerce is by mind, and you no longer need to till the land, and warfare, either women participate in it or it's done by drones. There is no precedence or excellence man has over a woman, so the whole notion of qiwama changes as well. I'm just saying, Quran was not giving fixed laws that are eternal. It was being pragmatic, and it was telling us something else in essence. How to give everything its rightful due. That was the rightful due back in the day. The other general feature of the Islamic law is that it was gradual. It understood human nature, and this is something we have forgotten today. We have forgotten that human beings have to be cultured, nurtured, intellectually stimulated. They have to understand what they are doing, and then slowly their nature surrenders to a new protocol. Look at the verses around the consumption of alcohol. In Surah Baqarah, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسَرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعٌ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. Baqarah 2:19. They ask you about wine and about gambling. Say, in there is a great wrong, and yet there is benefit in there for people, but their wrong is greater than its benefit. This is now intellectually, rationally telling them about the effects. Then you come to Surah Nisa, verse 43. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ. O you who believe, don't approach Salah when you are drunk, until you understand what you are saying. Don't come near Salah. And a thought is coming, but I'm going to resist the temptation. Then you come to Surah Ma'idah, verse 91, 92. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنساب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. O you who believe, indeed wine and gambling along with other things are the filth from shaitan. Resist from it, avoid it, so that you may become successful. Then look at the verse, giving the rationale as well. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر. Shaitan wishes to bring about social discord, enmity and hatred within your hearts through intoxication and through gambling. وَيَسُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, and to block you from the remembrance of Allah, وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ, and from prayer. وَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Now will you now muntahun, now will you stop and desist? This was the final rule. But it's come from Surah Baqarah all the way to Ma'idah. It's a gradual progression. First, reason with them. They are steeped in the culture of alcohol consumption. You can't let it go just like that. So the Prophet slowly, gradually puts processes in place. The same thing we find with the covering of the women and their hijab. I'm not going to go through the verses here. It was evolutionary, gradual, and it was evolutionary. Zakat was institutionalized and then tweaked and then added and then tweaked. So there is zakat, just giving. Then you have proper shares of zakat. Then slowly, as the needs increase and Muslims are successful, the surah of Khums comes. Then as the others begin to surrender to the Prophet without warfare, the verse of Anfal comes. So gradually it's being evolved in an organic manner. It's an evolutionary law system. It's gradual, natural, and organic. And the verse of Khums and the verse of Anfal has no distinction of Sayyid and non-Sayyid. That's the Quran for us. Then the portions of zakat by the end of the prophetic mission are these: إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله. The portions of zakat are for the destitute, for the poor, the people who work on zakat, the people whose hearts are lenient towards Islam, in freeing slaves, people's debts to be paid off by zakat, and in the way of Allah and the wayfarer. Now, this is Surah Tawbah, verse 60. Now, if you ask about ulama, such as Marhum Sayyid al-Khomeini and others, they will say that this was not the final enumeration of the recipients of zakat. It would be a mistake to think of it in that way. These are just some of the extensions that were there. So you can see that the scholars' minds are already there, that there is no finality to the law. The law is in essence, as far as the form is concerned, it is an evolutionary form. My time is finishing. The Prophet institutionalized the liberation of slaves. This kafara, free a slave. Killing somebody by mistake, free a slave. Taking an oath, free a slave. He initiated the process of freeing a slave. The whole idea there was, in accordance with the broader Islam, there should come a time when you ban slavery altogether, finish it off. Because he initiated the trend. Then, of course, I'm not going to talk about all of this here, but minimizing the draconian laws of the Torah. The Prophet's Quran has no mention of stoning people to death or killing people for any crime whatsoever, apart from the enemy of God in that verse, that they should be killed or driven away. But that was the Muslims who had raided somebody else. It's a very context-specific verse, but the Quran does not give the death penalty for any crime. And if you study the life of the Prophet, he has never, to the best of our knowledge, apart from certain solitary narration, he has never stoned anybody to death. Neither in the case of adultery or in the case of anybody else. Now, here's something that I want to say, and I'm going to finish quickly. If the Prophet had stoned somebody to death, how many people reported it? One person or two people, and then different chains of people reporting from that same person make it appear as if people have stoned the Prophet has stoned 6 people to death. When you narrow it down, they're all coming from the same source. So it appears that it's one. Now that one, the initial reporter, are you telling me that the Prophet took the whole Medinan community to the desert? He dug 2 holes, buried 2 people, chest or waist deep, and they threw stones. The woman cried out, the man cried out, the stones hit them, the blood oozed from their body. It is a horrific scene. You're telling me only 1 or 2 people have reported this? Surely people should have been speaking about it, that we saw her die like this. Then we took her out and then we buried her and then her near ones came, and the rest of the story should follow, right? There should be forensic examination of these sort of texts. The Prophet removed stoning to death The Quran removes stoning to death, and the Prophet would not act in accordance with anything that is not in the Quran. In fact, the Quran says, and the women who bring about such an act, confine them to their quarters until God finds a way out for them. Right? And in Surah An-Nur, وَالزَّانِ وَالزَّانِيَ فَجْلِدُوا كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا مِئَةَ جِلْدَةٍ. The male and the female adulterers, whip them 100 times. Where does this stoning to death come from? Stoning to death is the law of the Torah, omitted by the Quran. Now, when the Arabs around Medina were looking at this, they were getting impressed. What a disciplined community. What a God-centered community. They have a system of care, looking after each other. They are calm. So they were getting impressed. But at the same time, the people of the book were feeling a lot of jealousy. Consider the verse of Baqarah 109. وَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يُرَدُّونَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا حَسَدًا مِّنْ عِنْدَ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Many of the people of the book secretly wish that you would become kuffar again. They are jealous of you because when you were kuffar, they used to look at you as savages, pagans, dirty people. Now you've become sophisticated. You're clean, you're high class, you have morals now, you know how to talk, you're organized, you're caring for each other. They were gripped with utmost jealousy. This is how successful the prophetic immediate preaching was in Medina. But at the same time, the Prophet was very, very broad-minded. He prohibited interest in his own community because it was abusive. Yet he said to the people of the book, you may practice interest. He said no alcohol consumption. He said to the people of the book, you may continue. He said no consumption of swine. He said to the people of the book, you may continue. He said to his community, you need to wear the veil. He said to the Christians and the Jews, you have no compulsion and no force on you. They were seeing a man who was truly a pluralist and a confident man who has brought a religion that can embrace their religion. They can't withstand each other, he can withstand them both together. This is how broad a religion this great prophet was creating. We come to Karbala. Imam Hassan had several sons. Aside from one who had died in Medina, and Hassan al-Muthanna, who was pronounced dead in Karbala, but had not died. The rest of the sons of Imam Hassan were killed in Karbala. His youngest son was Abdullah, who was 11 years old. Now we find this in the Maqatil that after the Shahada of Hazrat Ali Asghar, Imam Hussein made way for his final battle. But at some point, he came back to the tent and the enemies followed him. So he came out to face them. As he fought them, he fell to the ground. At that point, Abdullah, the son of Imam Hassan, emerged from the tent. And he shouted, why do you kill my uncle? Imam Hussein looked towards him. And he looked at Zainab behind him and surmised that the child was going to run to him. He cried out, Ya Zainab, ihbisihi. Zainab, grab the child. She could not. He ran to Imam Hussein. As he came to Imam Hussein, somebody was about to strike Imam Hussein. And the child lifted his arm to ward off the blow. And the arm was cut. And he cried, oh uncle, they have severed my arm. Imam Hussein grabbed him to his chest. And Hurmala shot him down. He said, like this, O child, shall we be raised in front of your grandfather and my brother. Customarily, we narrate the Masaib of Hazrat Qasim. We see this from the popular narrations that on the night of Ashura, Imam Hussein summoned them all. And he said, you may leave. By your deaths, they shall not spare me. They said, Hussein, we have come here to defend you. We will not value our lives over your life. Imam smiled and he said, God has not given the likes of my Sahaba to anybody else before me. He said, take good blessings that you shall all have martyrdom and shall inherit the paradise. Qasim said, and he was very young, barely 14. Oh uncle, shall I attain martyrdom tomorrow? Imam Hussein looked at him, tearfully asked him, oh child, how do you find death? For you, O uncle, sweeter than honey. The Imam embraces him. The war breaks out. The companions lose their lives. Akbar has tasted Shahada. The sons of Muslims have been killed. The sons of Imam Hassan have been killed. Qasim comes to Imam Hussein. He looks at him and he turns his face away. He says, oh uncle, allow me to defend you. He looks at Qasim and embraces him and cries for a while. Then he cuts Qasim's turban in two. Humayd ibn Muslim says, he places one part upon his shoulder and chest as if covering him with a shroud. And another part he ties upon his head and leaves a part falling upon his face and around his neck, so that the face of Qasim was appearing from beneath the black turban. Humayd ibn Muslim says, when Qasim ascended his steed, I saw his sandal dangling and it was broken. And his feet could barely reach the stirrup. Imam Hussein with Abbas stands upon a hill. Qasim moves to the battlefield. I am Qasim, the son of Hussein, the son of Hassan. This is my uncle Hussein surrounded by you. May God not quench your thirst on the day of reckoning. Umar ibn Sa'ad says to Azraq, finish him off. It is an insult for me to fight a child. I shall send my son. As his son approaches the battlefield, Hussein looks at a renowned warrior. Inadvertently, he raises his glances to the sky. Says, oh Allah, my Qasim is a child. Grant him victory. Qasim puts him to that. He sends another son. Qasim puts him to that. He sends all his 4 sons in single combat, and Qasim overcomes all of them. In a rage, Azraq enters into the battlefield. Hussein unable to contain himself. Oh Allah, my child is thirsty. Allow him victory. As Qasim puts Azraq to that, they surround him and attack him from all directions. Somebody comes from behind and strikes the blessed head of Qasim. As Qasim descends from his steed, Hussein descends from the hill like a raging lion. Hussein subdues the killer of Qasim. Humayd ibn Muslim says that the panic was such and there was so much dust that had risen, I could not see anything. But after a little while, I could hear the cries of Hussein. As he cried out, "O child, how may your old uncle bear this scene, that you called upon him, but he could not reach you?" As the dust settled, Humayd ibn Muslim says, I saw Hussein's face on the torn chest of Qasim, and I saw Qasim rubbing his heels upon the dust of Karbala. Hussein carries Qasim. His feet are dragging against the dust of Karbala. We hear that he takes Qasim's body and places it next to Akbar's body. He sits between the two and places his hands upon their chests and says, "Oh Allah, Hussein has become deprived of his children." Matam Hussein.
دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، ایک گٹھڑی میں فقط، ایک گٹھڑی میں فقط قاسم کا لاشا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، چار کاندھوں پر جنازہ گھر میں آتا مگر، چار کاندھوں پر جنازہ گھر میں آتا ہے مگر، ایک ہی کاندھے پہ اس کا جنازہ گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، جس طرح چنتا ہے مالی پھول اپنے باغ کے، جس طرح چنتا ہے مالی پھول اپنے باغ کے، ٹکڑے کیوں قاسم کے تم نے میرا مولا آ گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، چوم تعویذ سرور دیر تک روتے رہے، چوم تعویذ سرور دیر تک روتے رہے، بھائی کے لفظوں میں جانے یاد کیا کیا آ گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، آ گئی بارات سے روکے فضا نے کہا، آ گئی بارات سے روکے فضا نے کہا، بی بی ہوتا عظیم کو اٹھ جاؤ دولہا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، لاش کو ترتیب جب دینے لگا زہرا کا لال، لاش کو ترتیب جب دینے لگا زہرا کا لال، بارگاہ مولا کی آنکھوں میں اندھیرا آ گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، دشت میں ابن حسن پر وقت کیسا گیا، تعویذ تھا بیٹے کے بازو پر بندھا، باپ کا تعویذ تھا بیٹے के बाजू पर बंधा, इसलिए पहचान में आसिम का लाशा आ गया। दश्त में बने हुस्न पर वक्त ऐसा आ गया, दश्त में बने हुस्न पर वक्त ऐसा आ गया। मातमी के घर में अकबर जब कोई दूल्हा बना, मातमी के घर में अकबर जब कोई दूल्हा बना, याद सबको करबला वाले का चेहरा आ गया। दश्त में बने हुस्न पर वक्त ऐसा आ गया, दश्त में बने हुस्न पर वक्त ऐसा आ गया।
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، أجل الله فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك، وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك، ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Could everyone please be seated for a few announcements, please? Tomorrow night's program will start at 7:50 with Quran lecture, Martyrdom Ziyarah, and with Salah. We will also be having the Q&A session with Shaykh Arif tomorrow, which is Saturday, 6th of August, after the program. Refreshments will be served in the dining room today. Before I request everyone to prepare for Salah, can I just call on Sheikh Mahmoud Dalla to give us a few words?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing with highlighting some of the activities of the Institute so you get a glimpse of what is taking place here. Last time we talked about its research activities and educational arm and the Hawza on demand. We should also say that there are also scholarships and fee waivers available for those who might be interested to study. In addition to the flagship curriculum under education and research, AMI is also taking research beyond here, where it has initiated some pioneering initiatives in response to both theological questions as well as contemporary challenges. So in this, I'll just mention very briefly what we have. We have what is known as the ICCI, or the International Center for Collective Ijtihad. This is an initiative that brings together mujtahids and experts of specialist fields, including banking, medicine, bioethics, to discuss issues that affect Muslims worldwide. Over the past years, this body has provided justified guidance on issues such as: can Muslims recite prayer in their native language? Is it permissible to keep dogs as pets in Islam? Are non-Muslims ritually pure? And can we consume the food they prepare? You see, these are questions that are facing us. My neighbors, both of them have dogs on each side, so it's constantly. And we know our obsession with the... So these are very real life questions that are being answered. We have the Center for Islamic Decree and Doctrines, or also known as Dar al-Ifta wal Aqaid, bringing together scholars from diverse Muslim legal schools to provide unified guidance, again on issues that affect Muslims living in the West, both of a theological, jurisprudential nature, which are arising due to modern day social, technological, scientific advancements in healthcare, geopolitics, finance, etc. Issues that have been discussed and guidance has been given were funeral rites of a Muslim during COVID-19. There was a time when we did not know how we may be able to bury people adequately or appropriately. The rights of animals in Islam, the permissibility of sex reassignment surgery in Islam. We also have the Center for Intra-Muslim Studies, or which is known as SIMS, which has been at the forefront encouraging critical intra-faith dialogue between Muslim scholars of all denominations, and it might be pioneering in its field, what it is doing. It's providing an open and honest forum where different Sunni and Shia scholars of all denominations meet together to discuss historical, theological issues of contention. So it is not shaking hands, having cups of tea and saying everything's fine. But people are discussing issues over which blood is being spilled, but doing so in a very, very dignified, scholarly, respectable manner, and to try and reconcile relations through building harmony and unity. Some contentious issues that were addressed have been the door of Lady Fatima, the Battle of Siffin, understanding Imam Ali's stance, the Caliphate of Imam Hassan, and abdication to Muawiyah. We also have the Inter-Religious Symposia, IRS, which continues to bring together scholars and theologians of different Abrahamic faiths. Again, various issues are discussed there. All this can be reflected from the statement of Imam Muhammad Baqir salawatullahi alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Indeed, the life of knowledge is sustained through constant discussion and critique. The life of knowledge is sustained in this way. In light of this, AMI not only explores new questions, but also reconsiders issues that have previously been concluded upon, but continues to pose great challenges to Muslim communities. And as you can see, AMI also has a deep connection with the community. After easing of the lockdown restrictions, we have resumed the outreach community events and continued the annual commemoration of Muharram, and inshallah coming of the Arba'in as well, together with the big iftar and Eid prayers. And over the past year, AMI has been honored to host the Time for Change initiative, which is a community-driven initiative that organizes Thursday night programs during the month of Ramadan and other major events at AMI. So it is indeed a place which is much more than where people are learning to do wudu and talk about prayers, as you can see. If you wish to support the Institute or know more, please come and see me at the desk. Finally, can I kindly ask you to recite Surah Fatiha for all the marid and the young boy we might have seen on TV over the last few days who's been in a coma since April. And all the marhumin for whom tonight has been dedicated,